We open the scene tonight following Robert DeVere as he makes a hasty getaway from the Hatchard's collection of texts and scrolls, having just claimed some old tome of foreboding quality. Robert, where do you intend to go with the dwindling night remaining?
With eyes wide open and constantly checking his shoulder, Robert will make his way back to... he'll make it back to the manor of Thomas.
All right. And Eleanor, I believe you also said you returned to the manor.
That's where she was headed, yes, and this is where my question comes in. What type of role would you like me to make in order for her to at least try to maintain that calm facade she usually has?
On the street or in the manor?
Back to the manor.
While you're heading back to the manor?
Yes.
I will have you make... Let me see...
Enemies in the city, it's best to at least attempt to appear like nothing's wrong.
Manipulation etiquette. Difficulty 6.
I'm sorry, manipulation what?
Etiquette. You're pretty well practiced at controlling your facial expressions the way you want them to, given the social situation you're in, so you don't have a trouble, despite how bothered you might be by your recent encounter in the alleyway. No one passing you by seems to give you a second glance. Meanwhile, at the Chamberlain Manor, as both Cormac and Thomas are in the study, reading to themselves, the two of you are interrupted as Kazim enters the room and then bows briskly before turning to Thomas. Your two guests have returned.
Which two?
The woman Elined and the man Robert DeVere.
Show them in.
He bows his head and turns. And Elined and Robert, you are brought into the manor and you meet with Kazim, who goes off to alert Thomas, and he returns, inviting to escort you both to Thomas and Cormac, if the two of you wish to do that.
Oh, she will most definitely do so.
Robert will.
Alright. So it's less than a minute later when the door opens again to Thomas and Cormac, and Robert and Elined step in. Go ahead and describe both of you, Robert and Elined. We'll start with Robert, appearance-wise.
Robert's looks unhinged as he's tightly grasping a bundle of cloth.
And Elined.
We were taken... Or did they relocate to a different room?
I did not hear the first thing you said.
Yeah, sorry. Are they or were they taken to a different room?
Anybody else catch that? Are there what? You're saying, are there tables or were they taken out?
Roboto. Any better?
Your voice is fine, just keeps cutting in and out.
Yeah. Comcast.
It's okay, we'll work through it.
Right. As a refresher, the location, is that still in the stables or did they relocate? The study.
They're still in the study.
Okay. So, Ellen has her hands folded in front of her and is usually, as usual, that very calm, controlled expression. She glances to them and says, "You feel that it is appropriate to discuss matters here? Or do you think that we'll be overheard?"
No one who might overhear us is going to spread word outside of this manor.
Very well. I have received news from a rather odd individual. Rather wiry man. And he has mentioned that there are individuals in this city who, as fall, wish to see the Gauntlet fall. He did not name names. However, they are residing here.
Did he specifically say the Gauntlet, or was
He
there
specifically mentioned
there was no broader implication to his words?
No, the Gauntlet was mentioned by name.
Interesting.
Can't give a apt description of him. I know he is very build and he tended to keep to the shadows, so that's all I have to go off of.
A prior.
Though he did mention someone we could speak to. A poetry lover in Chester who has the family name.
A poetry lover, you say?
She nods. And looks over to Robert and says, "Not being too bold, I believe that's more your field."
Why, yes, it is. And I must say I've had quite an interesting night, to put lightly. And he'll gently put down the book on a table and start unraveling it. As he's unraveling, I don't suppose anyone here speaks what I think is Aramaic?
Gesundheit.
Aramaic? No one speaks Aramaic.
I have a bit of language. Sorry. I have admittedly never.
I'm quite proficient with Greek. Maybe I can puzzle some of it out.
By all means. And take a look. This book gives me a terrible feeling.
How can a book give you a feeling unless you've read it?
Just a sense about it.
Thomas also looks quite intrigued by the implication.
Superstition and poppycock. Let me have a look.
By now, the book is surely unfurled from its blankets and is sitting there to be examined. Have at it.
And the rest of you, of course, see the same tome I described before. It's small with yellow, beige, fringed pages. It looks very simple in appearance and has some language written, scrawled across the front of it. And actually, Robert, you would have, when you bundled it up, you had the one piece of scroll that you had found from perhaps this man that you had met, which had scrawled a single thing that was kind of attached next to this tome. And that is in Latin.
There's a scroll he was not aware of?
It's the same one I told you about. It just says Profanum Imperium.
Oh, okay.
And there's a little outline that kind of... It's almost as though he was drawing the book and then turning the letters into Latin. And so you gauge he got as far as perhaps translating the title.
I came across a very odd individual. He seemed to be a scribe, but when spoken to, he decided to leap out of a window.
Maybe it was your face.
I assure you, I was not encouraging this action by any means. Upon looking around his home, I discovered this.
Cormac's gonna take a look at the book.
It's sitting there upon the desk, a bunch of cloth wrapped around it, although the surface has been revealed.
Is there lettering on the front?
Yes, and it is in some kind of Eastern language that you are... Let me see, I think you know this. Maybe you do. You do not. It's certainly not Greek. You don't think it's Latin because you've seen that everywhere. It's not anything like Latin.
It said, you know, that Aramaic was the language of Jesus and his apostles. If this is such a language, then it's very old indeed, as much of the New Testament was written in Koine Greek, and books that came after as well. He'll open the book. He's not afraid of it.
You crack the book open, and you can feel the pages are very frail, very dried out. It wouldn't be much at all to destroy this book. You could probably crush it in your hand if you really wanted to. The pages are filled with similar text, a similar language that you're unfamiliar with. Some pages have simple diagrams in them, strange symbols mixed with some of the lettering.
This is very interesting. And he will turn the pages with the delicate touch of a scholar, not wanting to damage the book.
You find that it's about half empty. That is to say, half the book is empty pages. The last page you see, it seems like it was about halfway down, something was being written, and then it's just blank after that.
And incomplete.
A journal of some sort.
It's possible, but look at these symbols and diagrams. I'm afraid if you're going to want this translated, you'll need a scholar of higher caliber than myself.
I think we know of one scholar, perhaps.
One who can translate ancient Syrian.
His skills I'm not certain, but if he is used by the court as often as he claimed, perhaps enough Tet would be able to.
That should be a good first step. If we intend to pursue this little fancy of yours. It doesn't really have much to do with our investigation, does it?
No, it does not, unfortunately.
Still, the scholar in me is intrigued.
Cormac, I'll have you do an intelligence academics roll, standard difficulty. Being the most scholarly, this is something that I think would be most poignant to you.
That was a good roll.
Based on how this is written and the way it ends, and the formatting, and just kind of your knowledge of writings and essays, it looks like it could be a journal. An incomplete journal, that is.
Yes, I'm most fascinated by this book. If your scholar doesn't pan out, perhaps we can find an elder of some sort. One, perhaps, who existed before Christ. As frightening as that is to say.
Or at least one who was interested in studying things from before then.
I'm certain there's bound to be a multitude. Especially among the Cappadocians. Too bad we don't have one at hand.
At the very least, it should be someone we can at least somewhat trust.
Ha! We're talking about elders here.
There's precious few of them that we can trust.
Hence why I said somewhat.
You might as well have Tom Lafoy translated at that point.
You've almost made me wonder if he could.
The other question you'll need to ask is, if he can, will he give you the truth of it?
That is the most important part.
And then, of course, if he does give you the honest translation, to whom will he sell it next?
If this book is as ominous as I feel it is, this perhaps should be carefully guarded, if not outright destroyed.
Oh, no, Joe, you can't destroy it. Not before we know what it is precisely. Someone leapt out the window for it.
I suppose. This was quite an odd person, too. He had scars all over and was missing his pinky.
Which floor did you say he jumped from?
A second-story window. I would assume a regular mortal would have been crippled, but he was able to continue sprinting away.
So potentially one of our kind.
I wouldn't leap too far on that conclusion. I've fallen from greater heights with but a few scrapes prior to being turned.
Perhaps.
In any case, what scholar you find, you'll have to find quickly. We have travel plans, after all. Or we can take the book with us and try to find our luck elsewhere.
Speaking of travel, should we leave the neonate here, it is possible that those in the city who wish to see us fall are going to, well, potentially coverage. But that's me jumping to conclusions.
Cormac's face goes dark again and he looks at Thomas. There's so many words in that glance.
I've given her the freedom to choose. Though it sounds as though we may need to cover a good deal more ground. Much as I'd like for all of us to go to Lincoln, it doesn't seem prudent.
Well, I certainly intend to go to Lincoln.
It sounds as though we might need to check out a source in Chester as well.
Yes. Well, does anyone want to volunteer?
Volunteer for what exactly?
Phantom locations to cover more ground in less time.
Though, from what it sounds like, the one who approached you was quite mysterious. Perhaps it is a trap.
I myself assume everything's a trap. That's how I've lived so long.
It is generally a good idea to believe there are ulterior motives to most things. However, I am curious about this person. How, important this lead investigation, I am not so certain.
And we should consider it just another unnecessary distraction.
Don't be so hasty. They are implying somewhat that they may know the enemies of the Gauntlet, but perhaps they're unable to come out and say it.
Perhaps speaking within the confines of the city on the matter is just too dangerous.
Perhaps he doesn't trust us entirely either.
Perhaps.
Very wise on his part as well.
So then we have the choice. We can all travel to Lincoln and then return here. We can travel in twos. Some to Chester and some to Lincoln to carry on the investigation. Or we can do a roundabout trip and visit Chester by way of Lincoln.
Whenever we decide I have business in Lincoln, that must be my first stop.
I suppose I don't have a dire need to return to Lincoln. If you actually have business there, Cormac, perhaps it's best you and maybe Thomas go and question our witness.
I was definitely thinking that could be accomplished while in Lincoln, yes. Whether or not Cormac will have me as his traveling companion.
Oh?
Thomas just shrugs, smiling coyly. If you'll have me.
Is water under the Troll's Bridge. We have more pressing matters than my personal concern for you.
I'm touched.
Though, to be fair, Chester isn't too far from Lincoln.
This is true, it is not. But still. It's enough to be annoying.
Come now, Javert, where's your adventurous spirit?
I'm quite familiar with Lincoln. Perhaps we can all travel together. I can show everyone around. And we can head to Chester.
Splendid, I second it.
It does seem...
Very well. I suppose this is the time to stick together anyway.
There are wolves at every window.
How goes the preparations for our trip?
I'm going to assume that's a question for Thomas, which means that's a question for the storyteller.
That it is.
Did you tell Kazim you were heading to Lincoln? Can't remember.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna say that it's pretty close to being ready.
So, berthing on a ship bound for that area.
Yes, leaving London up to Boston.
I believe so. I always keep losing Lincoln on the map. There it goes. Yep.
Yes, that should be fine. You have coin enough for fare.
Nevertheless, when we leave a note behind for my ghoul should she arrive.
I'll make sure Kazim knows to expect her.
If my math is correct, she should arrive within 10 days.
Did you send her to London or Lincoln? I thought you sent her to Lincoln.
Oh, right. A letter for Lincoln.
Yeah, you sent a letter.
It was initially London and I revised it for Lincoln.
Because you would also know that it would be a fortnight's travel on like a wagon from here to Lincoln, whereas it will probably be only 4 or 5 nights on the coast on a ship.
Yep. Oh, my apologies. I seem to have forgotten that I revised the letter so for her to meet up with us in Lincoln.
And then we shall have a comfortable trip both from here to Lincoln and from Lincoln to Chester. I promise our berthing will not be in the bowels of a ship again.
Very well. And as a reminder, she is bringing the light-proof carriage that should prove useful.
You bring a carriage onto the ship?
Oh, no. My, ghoul
I
was
see what you
riding
mean.
up here with
Yeah.
the light.
Yes.
I assume there'll be room for my new acquisition.
You mean the horse?
He has a name, you know.
I'm sure. Most do.
His name is Bolt, and where I go, he goes. We've come to an understanding, he and I.
Trying to think if
Tell me, are you going to run after this horse as other people are trying to chase down an individual, much like our friend over here?
If the situation arises.
I'm sure there will be more than enough room on board, but I will pass the word along to the ship's captain.
Very kind of you, sir.
I just hope he doesn't spook and hurt himself while he's in the hold.
Well, now that you say it like that, I hope that as well.
It shouldn't be much of a worry. I simply recall seeing far too many livestock shifted off incoming ships that didn't make the voyage.
I can't tell if you're being practical or cruel.
Could be both.
Practical. Always.
Well then, let's just assume everything will go according to plan.
Or at least hope it does.
As you say. Out of curiosity, how long before the ship in question departs?
I'm gonna say it's gonna be a couple nights.
Perfect. Then we have a few more nights in London, and then a few nights out to sea.
Then I suggest we make the best use of our time. Robert, how soon can you see that scholar about your book?
If you mean enough Nantet, isn't he still in Salisbury?
Getting a message to him would be the greater challenge.
Very well, and Elenid? How deeply do you wish to pursue your prior?
Finding someone who does not wish to be found. A tricky matter. Though, speak to me near the usual tavern we seem to go to.
I wonder if he wasn't waiting for someone else.
It's possible, but... In truth, that message could have been directed to any of us.
Wasn't there a vacant booth the first night we returned to London?
There was indeed.
I wonder if it wasn't the same prior.
I have come to as well. Although one considerable coincidence.
Thomas looks very deep in thought, steepling his fingers and drumming them against each other.
Cormac gets up and returns the book to the shelf. Anyone feeling a bit peckish? I know I am.
A bit. I'm more than willing to accompany you.
It's a long shot. It's unlikely he'll attempt to approach any of us a second time. But a quick bite wouldn't be a terrible idea.
We must, after all, gather all our strength for the journey. We can't very well be feeding off the sailors.
I expect they'd take exception to that.
I have already fed for the night. Along, I know there are at least 2 individuals that I want to become friendly with that I did not take from. Should they be there, it would be easy pickings.
I could stand to wait until tomorrow if that would be better.
Considering the time, perhaps we should wait until tomorrow.
Then shall we just make preparations for our rest?
If that is all to be discussed, I see why not.
I think I'd like to have a word with Amelia if she does come back. See if she's made a decision, whether she's coming or staying.
For her sake, I hope it's the latter.
I don't disagree with you.
Then perhaps you should convince her.
I expect I'll be presenting a compelling argument.
I expect nothing less from a silver-tongued ox like you.
Thomas chuckles a bit, shrugs.
I'll be retiring to my quarters then.
As you say, and he pushes up from his chair and meanders out of the room. He's going to go looking for Kazim just to pass on some instructions for the next day. But that's neither here nor there.
Okay. Otherwise, everyone else sleeping for the day?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what instructions did you... Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Elinette intends to run over some stratagems in her head in order to, well, keep her mind sharp, not dull her skills. But she would be retiring to her quarters.
You go over some strategies, and your mind always comes back to that the battle or General Talbot or Talbot failed. You can't shake that memory. It's your only significant defeat of memory. Meanwhile, what instructions does Thomas give to Kazim?
He's going to have the solicitor make arrangements to meet with him and Cormac the following evening, and word to be sent to the ship that is berthing them to make room for, is it a stallion?
Yes, I believe I said it was a courser.
Yeah.
Okay. He agrees to make these arrangements. Anything else?
Waiting up for Amelia.
Tonight you are?
Yep.
She does not return tonight.
Well, that's distressing. Not surprising, but...
In any case, you all find sleep in the day. And the scene ends as we transition into the next day. And actually, I think what we might do, unless a scene opens up for it, is we might broad strokes the next couple nights leading up to when you depart on the ship. You, Thomas, mean to meet with Cormac, as well as Kazim and your solicitor, who is Ralph Gunsberg, to discuss the documents that he's been putting together for your affairs.
Basically just review them to make sure he's not screwing me over.
Okay. Did you want to open that up into a scene?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And just so I have a couple of things in the back of my mind, Ellen, Nid, what do you mean to do over this? And, well, you'll mostly, in 2 nights, you'll be leaving pretty much that night. So what you're doing with this spare night?
Her intention is to travel around the city and keep an eye out for anyone who seems to be observing them in any odd way. Meanwhile, trying to keep her usual and keeping herself topped off as well, since they're going to be going on a boat for a considerable amount of time.
Okay. I think you only need one more to top yourself off. That's what you're trying to
do? When she needs to top herself out, back to that tavern, since she has a decent reputation there now.
Yeah, I'm not going to make you roll for that. You've been successful enough. You're developing a small reputation, and some of the locals are starting to notice you, so after enough time, it's easy enough for you to find someone and feed from them. So no roll needed. You can get your blood point back, going back to the tavern. As far as being noticed by anyone, let me look down the list of people here.
Yes, keeping an eye out for anyone watching us, since we know there are enemies in the city now.
You going to Elysium? Or just around town?
Around Elysium, where it takes me.
Around town and...
Around town and some short amounts of time in Elysium. She doesn't wish to be in the Den of Vipers for too long.
Okay. While in Elysium, you draw the attention of Ludovico Giovanni, who again tries to sell you on the idea, quite literally, of employing you to help him learn more about the British Isles, about England and the locals of the cities, acquaint him particularly with interest towards his own clan and that of the Clan of Death. Do you continue to rebuke him?
I continue to rebuke him. I have no interest in his schemes.
He's polite about your decline and hopes you'll reconsider. Otherwise, your time wandering the streets is fairly uneventful. From time to time, you'll see a familiar face you've seen in Elysium, and your eyes will pass across the streets of Kyne as they unknowingly stand between two predators passing in the night, but no words are exchanged. And your time is uneventful otherwise.
All right.
And Robert, what do you mean to do with your spare night?
He'll top up. Let's see, what else?
How many do you need? Just one?
Probably like 3.
I'm not going to drag us down in hunting rolls tonight, at least not for this moment. So you may take 3 if you are being free. If you put a good amount of time into hunting and you're smart about it, and Ancilla are fairly smart about hunting, and so I'm not gonna beleaguer us anymore with that. What else are you doing?
Does have an interest to find a scholar, or a scribe. So he'll visit such places looking for one that can read the text of the book he has.
Asking the Kyne?
Yeah, he's seeking the kind right now.
Okay. I have you do a wits investigation, difficulty 8. You're not having any luck. No one here knows what you're talking about. No one really knows any good scholars. It's kind of a strange request, and most of them wonder why you don't just go to Oxford or Cambridge.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to try and do in this night besides hunt and question the kind?
Perhaps I'll hang out in Elysium, but other than that, no.
Then you as well are contested by... not really contested, more just sought by Ludovico, who asks for your assistance in finding some of the harder to find people of England.
He'll ask if he has any leads.
Leads on...
Location of the individuals he's seeking.
None. He says that very few people are willing, very few Cainites here are willing to trust him enough to do business. Although some recognize the Giovanni as being very wealthy, even here they've reached something of They're quickly reaching a bad reputation. Unscrupulous. Although he does promise a handsome reward if you can point him in the direction of some of his erstwhile clanmates.
Robert will merely comment that he has discovered nothing new. And leave it at that.
Alright. Otherwise, your time spent in Elysium, Bella Matea tries to socialize with you, and you do actually see that Amelia still seems to be spending time with her, and so incidentally, you spend time with Amelia. And with that, of course, comes Helen and the many retainers that seem to follow them all.
Robert will start to try to get a read on Amelia. Is she genuinely enjoying her time with Bella?
Give me a perception, empathy, difficulty 7. You get a fairly good read on Amelia, since you are spending some time in Elysium. You get the impression that she's attached herself like a plankton or some kind of parasite to Bella Matea, maybe out of fear or just the way she's built. It's very childlike. She seems to go where Bella goes and seems to rely heavily on her socially. And given that they leave together often, you think perhaps that she's havening with Bella or something of that sort.
Robert will be polite in it all, respecting her choice.
Do you engage her much, or mostly just watching?
He'll engage her every now and then. Not just seeking her out solely, but whenever it's opportune, he'll greet her and query into how she's doing.
She seems to appreciate that. She seems to gravitate towards having you check in on her, and she does confide again that she seems to have conflicted feelings of regret for the way she handled everything with Cormac and Thomas. She feels as though she betrayed them or failed them and failed their instruction. And she also asks how long you all intend to stay in London.
Well, Robert will let her know when they're planning on leaving. He won't say We won't say where by or by what means reasonable to what she may have overheard, but he'll at least extend the offer.
For her to join you all?
Mm-hmm.
Are you extending the offer neutrally, or are you trying to convince her one way or the other?
At this point, it would be very neutral.
Okay. She politely declines, saying that she's going to take Thomas's advice and make use of the year of feeding that Bella has provided her. But will, since you do say that you're all leaving the next night, she will come out to wish you all fair passage.
Is that all for Elysium then?
For the most part. Yeah, you get a lot of people watching you. It seems like your status as Lord of the Gauntlet has drawn a lot of attention, as that you realize when you got here that wasn't widely known, but as it disseminates, it becomes apparent that you're definitely catching attention in Elysium. Some people are just being there. But otherwise, you mostly remain in the company of Bella, Helen, and Amelia, occasionally Ludovico. And was there anything else you want to try and squeeze into this night?
Other than say hi to apples, maybe? Nah.
You don't see apples.
Alright then. Then yeah, no, that's it.
Okay. Then we will transition to the scene with Cormac and Thomas. They're meeting with the solicitor. Alright. As promised, Thomas, you and Cormac are awaiting in the study when Kazim opens the door and escorts in this man with pink cheeks and a hat and a long drawn coat and what looks like a collection of scrolls and papers under one arm. This man, you believe, is Ralph Gunsberg and is introduced as such. And then Kazim promptly bows his head and closes the door behind him as he leaves. As Ralph kind of enters, and he also bows his head as he speaks up to the two of you. Good evening, gentlemen.
I appreciate you doing me this courtesy, meeting at such a late hour. My own business keeps me quite tied up during the day, as you might imagine.
I'm sure it does. I've had similar requests in the past. You're not the first. He offers a faint and quick smile. You wanted to go over the documents tonight, and who is this?
This is my associate. He gestures to Cormac, in case he wants to introduce himself.
Conrad Cortland. Cormac does his best to put on a very affected accent.
Ah, Mr. Cortland. Pleasure to meet you. Ralph Gunsberg. And you okay with him sitting in on this discussion?
Mr. Cortland is a student of law. I thought it might be prudent to have a second set of eyes reviewing things, just to make sure everything is in order.
Well, I have a duty to admit to you, then, that I cannot be held responsible for any dissemination of the information herein.
Quite all right.
Let us get down to business, then. And he sets down some of the papers and sits down in a chair beside the two of you. And in general, he starts going through some of these pages and details a lot of the verbiage used to do this transaction and what it means, some of the terms. He's actually, taking the time to explain a lot of this to you.
Does it seem like any kind of double talk?
Do you have any law? I think you do.
Yeah, I do.
Have you do a wits law difficulty 7?
I would like to do the same.
Absolutely. Do either of you have specialties?
No.
Okay.
No.
Both of you do a fairly good job of tracking on what he's saying. And from what you gather, it doesn't seem like he's trying to fast talk you out of anything or, give any vague definitions. There are a few parts where, he goes over stuff that you, Thomas, and he have already gone over in the past, which then he re-explains for Cormac, because he hasn't been on some of this conversation. And from what you can tell, he's being fairly straightforward with a lot of this. You don't detect any subterfuge.
Excellent. Then the lady will be able to operate independently from here forward.
Yes. If you want, I can file for these to be processed in the morning, and by the 1st of January of next year, will go into effect.
It's a good deal longer than I was expecting.
Well, unfortunately, that's the way of the courts. Unless you have quite a bit of coin to bribe the right judges. As a legal consult, I cannot recommend that.
And that kind of attention is the kind of attention I don't want.
The courts do a similar process of reorganization of accounts held, and it is all reorganized and set at the beginning of the year. Unfortunately, unless you know the right people, it's difficult to get around this, at least here in this city.
But legally speaking, this asset would no longer be tied to my name.
That is
For all
correct.
intents. Effective immediately as soon as it's filed, correct?
Effective January 1st of next year.
Well, I was hoping for a deal of speedier service, but then again, the wheels of the justice system do turn slowly.
As they do. What's your rush, if I may ask?
The rush comes from the recipient's end. I would very much like to be rid of the asset, and she would very much like to be able to operate without any oversight on my part.
He nods his head a few times. I've run into a few cases like this in the past. Difficult to get around. Above board, that is.
Thomas arches a brow a bit. What would you say, Conrad?
Certainly there must be some way we can get this accomplished sooner.
Well, perhaps if you had a royal decree attached to it, you could bypass some of these. It would go from the common law to the royal. They can move things along at the pace they need. Especially if you can justify it in terms of national defense.
I don't know that a bank would necessarily be a matter of national defense. And I don't have time to go seeking a national decree. I'm due in Lincoln tomorrow. I'm due to set sail for Lincoln tomorrow.
Well, Mr. Chamberlain, I wish there was more I could do for you. Unless you know someone in the royal courts, or surrounding the dear king, it'd be very difficult to get this before next year.
Sadly, I do not. But she will simply have to make do.
Well, in the meantime, if you come up with any nobility friends, do let me know. Perhaps we can arrange for something.
Certainly.
Can I do anything more for you, gentlemen, this evening?
I wonder if I might not provide you with a retainer.
He smiles.
I may have need of your skills in the future.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Yes, you, know my rate.
Shall I roll resources to see if I can come up with a sizable retainer for future investment?
That all depends on how long you want to keep him on retainer.
I mean, if he's not doing work, the retainer's not used.
Yeah, I'll have you roll resources, difficulty 6. Yes, you do think you could pay for his retainer.
See Kasim on your way out. He'll make the arrangements.
He nods his head and then bows as he rises, puts his hat back on, and collects the documents up. And out he goes.
Once he's gone, Thomas looks a deal more frustrated than he was letting on.
I must admit you did show remarkable restraint.
Who knew the courts would delay half a year or more?
I did. You didn't ask.
Thomas looks very nonplussed. He's not amused.
It's not surprising. They have many cases to see. And the transfer of property is hardly the highest priority.
Which is why one would imagine it simply gets dealt with. A rubber stamp, as it were.
You're asking a lot of a society built on litigation. You English have a love of paperwork.
None less so than I. In commerce, it's so much easier. You shake hands and exchange coin for goods, and the deal is done. But all of this, and he gestures around himself. Contracts. Long-term arrangements. Wages. Obligations.
Cormac grins. You do seem very eager to divest this bank of yours.
It's been a drain. It's doing nothing as it sits. Putting it in the hands of someone who is eager to run it, could benefit from it, perhaps turn it around, turn a profit on it, seems the best course of action.
Have you not considered giving this beneficiary some title of some sort within the bank that would allow her to do so without owning it?
Apparently this is all I can do.
And once again I say, damnable English. I come from a place where dealers are made with swords and fellowship. Or at least it was that way.
Before the damnable English.
He points a finger at his nose. All the same, there's nothing for it. It seems ironclad. It's a good barrister you have there.
He comes highly recommended.
I do admit hoping he wasn't on the up and up.
This is one of those situations where operating above board is in my best interest. The attention that would be drawn if a bribe were to be discussed openly by a less than subtle judge, would sour the milk.
It's a risk I wouldn't be willing to take considering our duty.
It's a risk I'm not willing to take at all, considering my relationship with the receiving party.
It's none of my business to ask what that relationship might be.
Quite right. But we damnable English and our paperwork might just see something done about that moment. And he'll grab a swatch of parchment and start jotting down instructions for the bank leadership.
And what are these instructions?
Effective immediately, one Judith Stone will take the position as what would be the appropriate title for the time?
For what?
Basically being in charge of the bank. Like, present day it would be bank president, but
Steward?
there we go. Lead steward. That'll work.
Times really are a-changing.
Oh.
There was a time, I'm sure you'll recall, that it would never be considered to allow a woman to handle a man's personal financial affairs.
Thomas guffaws loudly.
Now, I'm not saying I don't consider myself a very forward individual.
No, it's not that. It's not at all that.
Well then, spit it out. What is it?
Suffice to say, I think she'll do a fine job. I have utmost trust in the lady.
It's so rare you can find anyone you can trust these days. And believe me, I'm not questioning your judgment. Just the turning of the years.
Thomas looks still quite deeply amused. And he'll lean out of the study and wave Kazim over.
Kazim kind of raises his head in acknowledgement and comes walking over quickly.
Make sure this is delivered to the bank as soon as possible, first thing in the morning.
Yes, sir. He takes it and bows his head and turns to leave.
It's not legally on a change of ownership, but it's the next best thing.
The best we can hope for right now, anyway.
One of these days I'll have to explain that joke to you.
When I least expect it, I presume.
Oh, very probably. Shall we go for a bite then?
That, I think, is the finest thing you've said all night.
And if I hadn't said it yet, thank you again for handling this spot of bother with me.
I wasn't much help, I'm afraid, but
All the same, it's the thought that counts. Isn't that what they say?
I've heard it a time or two.
And unless there was more to the story, that I think is where Thomas and Cormac will head for the end.
All right. So this scene fades out, and with each of you having spent your night in the ways that you would, the day comes and goes. We emerge on the night that you are to depart. Right. So the group of you are down at the docks, loading things up into the ship, which is set for sail for Boston come the morning. And as you are setting about, bringing on Bolt the horse and your belongings, Thomas, you're walking down the gangplank back onto the docks when you see that Amelia is actually coming down the boardwalk and looking excited or anxious, or there's definitely emotion on her face, but it's just not clear what it is, but she's running up towards you.
Good evening, my dear. I missed you the other night.
Oh, good. I'm glad I caught you. I came as fast as I could. Yes, the other night I spent at Bella's. I wanted to see you all off before you left. I felt bad about how things ended, about what I cost you, and I at least wanted to wish you a safe passage and fair travels.
How thoughtful of you. I wonder, since you're going to be staying in London, if you wouldn't do a favor for me.
And just so it's known, the three of you, Elenid, Cormac, and Robert, as you're surfacing back up to the top of the ship, as you're still moving stuff in and out, you can also see, not too far away down the gangplank and on the boardwalk, that it looks like Thomas is speaking to Amelia. Do any of you engage, or are mostly watching for now?
Robert looks a bit curious, and he'll start walking over to greet Amelia.
Okay, and Cormac?
Cormac continues doing what he's doing, getting Bolt set up on the ship, making sure that all his feed and such is loaded up. He will give Amelia a sidelong glance, but does not go to greet her.
And Elenid?
Ned will continue. Amelia has already disappointed her once. She's not giving her the opportunity to do it again.
Alright. So Robert comes walking up just as Amelia replies to you. Well, yes, Of course, I would do a favor for you. Good evening, Robert. She turns to face Robert.
Good evening, Amelia. It's good to see you before our voyage.
And she smiles, looking back to Thomas.
I wonder if you wouldn't reach out to your fellow neonates. Speak with them. Listen to their concerns. Keep an ear to the ground.
Just listen to them? That's all you want?
Yes. You see, you're definitely closer to them than I am, at least in age. See if they have anything of great concern or grave nature to impart. Don't press. Let them speak to you.
Oh, yes, I can do that. Where are you headed? She says, looking over to the ship and then back to you.
Gauntlet business. Unfortunately, I can't discuss it.
Oh, yes, of course. Well, do be safe, and I hope to see you again soon.
Oh, and if you happen to see a young lady clad in black by the name Ellen, give her my regards.
She looks confused at that and kind of turns her head a little bit, but nods. I can do that.
Be safe, Amelia.
And she smiles and moves up to embrace you and kiss you on the cheek, and then moves to do the same to Thomas.
Thomas doesn't fight her off. He definitely responds in kind. Be safe, Amelia. Take care of yourself.
When she pulls back from you, Thomas, she kind of looks at you a little puzzled. Yes. Yes. And her eyes narrow for a moment. I will do that. Take care.
Thomas will step away and go to finish loading his luggage.
She turns to leave, but seems to watch the two of you go as she's walking.
Robert just turns to give her a smile and waves as he sets to getting everything ready.
Alright. Is there anything else you guys want to do before you set sail?
Oh, while Robert's walking back, he'll ask, who was the lady you were speaking of? Ellen?
A hunch. We'll see how it plays out.
Robert will shrug and say nothing more.
All right. The two of you return to preparing your ship for departure, and we will fade the scene to black as we end here, and we will break here for a 15-minute break, and we'll come back on the hour. Sound good?
Yep.
Cool.
Sounds good.
All right. The group of you set off, sailing north for the town of Boston. You have a few nights. You're told it will take 4 in total for you to arrive. Really 3, and then you'll be there the 4th day at dusk. Unfortunately, you can't take a very straight route, as the shallows across the coast prohibit too close a maneuver. So you sail east and then north. You have some time to discuss with each other any last-minute plans you might have before you dock, or what you might end up doing once you do arrive in Lincoln. Cormac, you at least recall that, I believe, let me make sure it's the right city. You do recall this is where you met Colton Sardini, the would-be financier of the Merchant of Wine, who did help you with some of your early endeavors into spreading your resource base before the Worshipful Company came along, whom you do still owe a favor to. What's going through Cormac's mind as he leaves London and makes for Boston and Lincoln?
He's wondering mostly what they'll find when they arrive. He wishes to have words with his sire, if he's here, of course, to ask his advice on a few things, but he might pay a visit to old Colton as well to see if there's anything he can do for him. Often his mind drifts back to the burnt-out husk of a house that they found, though, and what happened to the previous Gauntlet there.
And Robert, as you make your way on this voyage, you recall this is where you left your sire. You're most familiar with Lincoln, probably of everyone here. What's going through your mind as you make your way on the seas?
Mostly the lack of information they've been able to gain, as his grandsire will, if he's still here, would be most curious, and he doesn't have much to offer him at the moment.
And Elenid, you may be the least familiar with the city of Lincoln. What's going through your mind at this time, in the middle of your investigation, while you have some time to consider, reflect?
Well, she has no idea what awaits the city. Which would inquire with the others about it, what to be on the lookout for.
I think Robert would be most apt at telling you about the city if he is interested in sharing.
Robert is willing to share this information. However, I'm unsure of the actual players in Lincoln.
Oh, that's fine. I was going to go over it anyway. So you share with her what you know, the local court. Of course, Prince Jean-Marc de Martinique, the Covenant Prince, your grandsire, heads the city. The Seneschal is his ghoul, no Cainite, a man by the name of Reynald Rui, a fierce knight, respected even by the undead. Among the other powerful individuals, you do know of the Ventru Eden Everly. She seems to be someone of fairly significant legal influence in the city, and her child Colton is more of the merchant financier. Of course, there's your sire, Killian, the entertainer, who spends a lot of time there, although he also spends a lot of time traveling. You're also aware of two neonates who have been there for a couple decades now. A woman named Silas, and an older appearing man named Pierce Lockwood. They don't seem to have much for their name, and they're often found together in one of the inns or at court, hoping to get scraps of something. And you also discuss with her Hugh de Balsam, the advisor to Prince Jean-Marc, and the closest thing to a seneschal if it wasn't already taken by his ghoul. Hugh de Balsam seems to have more of a almost peer or equal status as more of a companion or friend to Jean-Marc than someone who obeys orders. These are the people that you know of note in Lincoln, which you share with Elenid. And Thomas, as you reflect on your investigation, what you're leaving behind and going towards, what's going through your mind?
Thomas is going over in his mind the questions he means to ask the ghoul witness. Cornelius.
All right. Your voyage is otherwise fairly uneventful. And on the fourth night, you dock in the town of Boston, quickly growing port city not very far from Lincoln. I'll have you each deduct 4 points of blood.
I'm sorry, my connection. How many dots of blood?
Just 4. 4 for the nights that you spent on the voyage. You each set about unpacking your things as dusk rolls in, and before long you have everything accounted for, and this time I will not make any rolls necessary for acquiring a carriage. So we'll say that you have a carriage that will take you to Lincoln from Boston. Let me just review my map. It's only 32 miles, which is just out of range for a single night's trip by the time that you're up and about, so it'll be one more night before you reach Lincoln. Do any of you mean to do anything before departing in Boston?
Grab a snack.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say. Probably not a bad idea to hunt first.
Alright. I will start with Elenid. How are you hunting?
Generally going to the local tavern and much like she did in London.
Mm-hmm.
If it's broke, don't yelling them with tales of her homeland. Well, little stories and such. The like.
Okay. I'll take that as a default unless you decide otherwise going forward. I'll take a Charisma Expression, difficulty 7. And while she's rolling that, Cormac, how are you going about hunting?
Cormac's going to find a place where the youth gather. The young and impressionable.
Okay. And do what?
He's going to ingratiate himself to them, being that he's a knowledgeable sort, and all their arguings about government will be something he can definitely chime in on.
I'll let you do a Charisma Empathy, also difficulty 7. Meanwhile, Elened, you find one individual which you can feed from. How much are you taking?
3 points.
Okay. That's enough to put them to sleep, but they won't be any real danger. So you take 3. Cormac, you are very successful in finding some of the youth in Boston who are really dissatisfied with the courts, with how King Henry VI has been... Really, his rule has been taken over by Duke Richard of York, who's kind of asserting himself far too strongly for his own status, even if the king is ill. And you gain 3 victims which you can feed from.
Alright, I'm going to take a total of 4 then.
Okay, easy enough. And Robert, how are you feeding?
You will feed by carousing at the inn.
Okay, Charisma, Empathy, difficulty 7. Oh yeah, you're a hit at the end. You find 4 people who gravitate to you quickly.
I'll take 4 blood points from all of them.
I'm assuming you mean in total.
Yeah.
Okay. And Thomas, how are you hunting?
Thomas is going to probably seek out a tavern close to Crafter's Row. And try and ingratiate himself amongst the tradespeople.
Alright, I will take a Charisma Empathy from you, difficulty 8. It is harder for the venture to hunt without established support.
Even in a target-rich environment, apparently.
you succeed. This isn't a very big town yet, but you happen to catch some of these craftsmen on their way home from one of the taverns, and you're able to feed from both of them after ingratiating yourself.
Then he will go ahead and find opportunities to sneak 4 blood points total.
Alright, you can absolutely do that. And as you are all sated or close to, is there anything else anyone means to do tonight before setting off for Lincoln?
Sounds like a hard no.
Alright. So you gather yourselves into this carriage, and I assume Cormac is riding Bolt alongside this carriage?
Yes.
Okay. So you set off. And the first night is mostly traveling through countryside, and it isn't until the next night, as the day comes and goes, dusk sets, and by the time it does, you can see you are very close to Lincoln indeed. You pass through the clay lowlands and the fens from the south, and through more open country in the Lincolnshire wolds, the many open hills of the countryside, and as you're drawing close, on the horizon is a walled city that sits atop an escarpment overlooking the River Witham and Castle Bale set within. Even at this distance, the great Gothic cathedral imposes itself on the city. It can be seen from 30 miles away, and it stretches 300 feet high, which becomes more apparent as you draw close. Some of the more academic among you would know this cathedral is famed in England for its ternite baptismal font, constructed from a single slab of black marble. It's otherwise very extravagant as a cathedral, standing out with its rose medallion windows and exquisite wood carvings and stained glass and interiors. The palace for the bishop is on the south side and is also enclosed by Castle Bale. And your carriage, plus Cormac, continues on into the city uninterrupted. As you reach the city gates, the city gates open. You are let into the streets, which are still busy. You just make it into the main drag of Lincoln, this main street that winds through the city. And Cormac, you're first to see them since you're on top of a horse. You see 10 knights are riding through towards you, bearing the heraldry of a triple Pegasus in red on a white background, led by a most formidable black horse, a patch of white hair in the shape of a spade. And this horse at the front stops just ahead of you, and the rider calls for a halt with his hand, a fist held up. And he dismounts as your carriage is brought to a stop, and Cormac, you with it. This soldier, this man, dismounts and removes a very ornate helmet, and you recognize him immediately. You see Jean-Marc. He takes his helmet and puts it under one arm as he smiles at the sight of Cormac. Ah. A trusty agent has arrived. And the rest?
In the carriage, my lord. And he'll dismount and bow.
And the rest of you, if you could not see him, could definitely hear him, as the carriage has been brought to a stop, and you realize Jean-Marc is outside of your carriage.
Robert will step out.
And Elenid?
Elenid will step out as well. After all, if he came all this way out here, there must be a reason for it.
Thomas as well.
You see that the streets are largely cleared, getting out of the way of this group of knights and this carriage. It's not quite as busy as London, although there are still people out and about in this city. And he smiles at the sight of you. Très bien. But I wonder why. What brings the Gauntlet here to my domain, my lords and lady?
We had hoped to speak with Cornelius. I trust he is well recovered from his injuries.
And just as Jean-Marc is about to reply, another rider comes up from the back of the knights behind him on a small brown pony, simpler in appearance, but ridden by apparently a man of the cloth, who also promptly dismounts. And Cormac recognizes him, of course. Yes, he is taken care of. And he turns a bit towards this man. You see a pale man dressed in cloth like a clergy, with a long red sash around his neck, although he does not carry any ornate jewelry or other items of office. Ah. Good evening. It is good to see you again, Cormac. And he smiles across the distance towards you, Cormac.
It's good to see you as well, Hugh. You, after all, are the whole reason I'm here.
Sorry, you sound really far away. I can't quite hear you.
Sorry, I had my my microphone turned up toward my ear. It's good to see you too, Hugh. You, after all, are the whole reason I'm here.
He smiles faintly. Please, why don't a group of you join me at the tower? I'm sure you must be famished from, where have you been traveling?
Did he ask how long or where have?
Where?
We come from London.
I would be a terrible host if I did not offer some refreshments. We can talk more about the dear Cornelius inside. And he kind of gives you a knowing look.
Of course.
Please, if you would follow me. And he turns to mount his horse again, and Hugh also does the same.
Cormac mounts Bolt, ready to follow.
And Thomas will rejoin the carriage.
As will Robert.
Alright, soon enough, the group of you are following this complement of knights with Hugh and Jean-Marc, and they lead you through the streets of the city, circling around into the inner fortifications, coming very close to this cathedral, which you can see just tears into the sky. You come around and find that you're entering the castle, this tall tower that, although impressive in its own right, is dwarfed by the cathedral. And in a short amount of time, your carriage is brought over to the stables, and your belongings are kind of set aside for the time being as the horses are tended to, and Jean-Marc and his knights bring you inside to the tower. He leads the group of you, along with Hugh, upstairs, up into the highest level of this tower, which seems to overlook much of the city. You find the knights have dispersed. You reach a room at the top, which is large and circular, with many windows that surely would catch much light during the day, and many hanging veils of cloth, which seem to decoratively create a space in this room. They're mostly translucent. He sits down at a table and places his helmet down on this empty stand of armor. Hugh joins him near the front, and another man enters with some refreshments.
I must say, though not by way of complaint, I hadn't expected such a reception.
And you see this other man who Robert would recognize as Reynald Rui is bringing in a platter of some small silver goblets and a decanter of a red viscous liquid, who sets it down and then stands off to the side as Jean-Marc kind of looks past him towards you. The most honored guests? Why would I not?
I expect from a distance, one carriage looks very much like another.
Indeed. It was quite fortuitous for you to arrive when you did. I was just heading out. And he takes a sip from one of these goblets, which is being filled. And Hugh, this more priestly-looking man, seems to be looking between the two of you. Please, do tell of how your travels have been.
Not entirely uneventful.
And he'll look past you to the others, pointedly at Robert, as if expecting him to speak up more.
Yes. We've traveled a fair bit. Made some progress in our investigation, but not as much as I would like.
Any progress is good. I would hear of what you have found.
Actually, given the fortuitous nature of our encounter on the street, I did have a question for you, my lord.
He turns back to you.
Recovered from the stables in Dorchester was a rather weighty iron chest, and inside a very expertly spun, quite expensive looking tapestry. It bore Gaton's sigil. You wouldn't happen to know more about that?
It was his estate, no? Is it a great surprise that you would find cloth bearing his sigil at his estate?
No, but the nature of the cloth specifically struck me. It seemed a merchant's sample, made to demonstrate quality of an item, quality of a technique. Weren't you and he in business together?
He gives a look towards Robert. Something just short of a glare.
Robert has a sheepish look. I merely suggested that some business dealing may have made him a target. I'd like to examine every possibility.
Don't fault him overmuch. I'm a merchant in the textile industry myself. I'd have reason to doubt either way. There was a note inside. Apparently, this particular sample was to be delivered to you directly.
His look returns to you. Who can say what Gaetan's intent was for it?
I had rather hoped you might.
I had some business dealings with Gaetan, although I cannot explain the purpose of this.
Can I do perception empathy and try to determine whether he means don't want to rather than cannot?
Absolutely.
Looks like I need to get 5 successes, but we're going to give it a shot.
You need more than that. What was your actual question?
I'm trying to determine whether he means, when he says he cannot say, does he mean I don't want to?
You're fairly certain he means that he doesn't know.
Still, it's a curious thing for one business partner to send such a thing to another business partner, with him none the wiser.
Perhaps he had more to say to me before he passed. Perhaps there are letters that burned up. These are the
As you
things we will
say.
not know now.
As you say,
Any unanswered questions about that night? And that is why I hope that you would find these answers.
The other thing we've discovered is from a Cassandra, when presented an item from the burned down manor. Her vision was quite disturbing, but we were able to glean from it a prior in the attack.
One of the silhouettes was in Gaetan's estate at the attack. You are sure?
And I believe what she saw was what the other saw before he died.
And what about you? What do you make of this? And he looks down the table towards Cormac.
The investigation is still in the early stages, but I believe what the Cassandra told them is truth. She nearly went madder for the information.
And then his gaze turns towards Elenid as though asking the same question.
I have nothing else to add as far as information pertaining to the investigation.
It seems perhaps much of what might have led to more answers had burned up. Hugh says as he kind of looks down, mildly frustrated.
It seems as though that was by design, in fact.
No doubt.
The only other bit of information we have is the one right now is mere hearsay.
What hearsay is this?
I have received word from a stranger back when we were in London, refused to give, that there are certain individuals within the city who will fail at our task. Now, whether or not it's connected, then there's if he's telling the truth or if it's a mere distraction.
He rests a hand on the table and fidgets with a ring in his finger, the other finger kind of moving around it in a circle. His jaw shifts. Perhaps Ambrose harbors some saboteurs in his city.
But that part of the investigation is being followed up on, so ploy to distract us will be known within. So.
The question I would posit is, are these saboteurs harbored knowingly or unknowingly?
He looks to you and nods. I'm afraid I cannot speak to the commitment of Prince Ambrose to the Covenant. I can speak only of my own. Who can say what snakes any of the worst may hide? I appreciate you updating me on the details. Why do you have interest in speaking to Cornelius so much? The details of his report were always given to you.
I would very much like to hear it directly from him. Just in case one of the attackers had subjugated his mind in some way.
We consider that he has been thoroughly interrogated by, no offense intended, but those older than yourself. Unless you do not trust me and my report. And he smirks towards you.
Of course, but I am a merchant. I don't buy wares sight unseen.
I only hope that perhaps some other dot can be connected with at least the knowledge of there being a prior.
He kind of taps this ring he's been playing with on the table a few times before he stops abruptly. Very well. Reynald, please go and fetch Cornelius. Bring him in. Reynald silently nods from the far corner of the room and crosses to leave. Tell me again what gave you the idea to reconsider his report.
We have new information that was not previously available. This has led to questions that may not have been asked.
What new
Again.
information?
The presence of the Prior, the fact that multiple assailants attacked from multiple angles. Fires were set almost simultaneously throughout the manor.
Well, you will hear the same answers, but I will humor you.
Again, no offense intended.
And about a minute later, Reynaldo re-enters the tower, followed by another man. He's a scarred-looking young man with long brown hair that curls around close to neck. He looks the rough sort, although he carries himself with more etiquette than you'd assume by appearance. Wearing simple tunic and hose, following after Reynaldo, and he stops at the far end of the table, but is beckoned closer by Jean-Marc. And Cornelius comes to stand beside the table closer to you all. What can I do for you, my liege? The Gauntlet here wishes to hear the report which you have given previously from your very mouth, and perhaps have more information to provide. And he gestures faintly to the group of you. He seems to be looking at the whole group, waiting for someone to speak up.
May we have the room, Your Grace?
His face slowly turns to you. Why do you need the room?
You know how ghouls are. So many canines gathered so closely. I don't want anxiety or fear of reprisal to color his responses.
He is the most trusted man of what was once what I would consider the greatest friend that I will ever know in this sun life. You do not feel threatened, do you, Cornelius? And he turns back to Cornelius. No, sire, of course not. And then Jean-Marc kind of looks back to you and does a simple hand gesture as if to prove himself. Indeed, perhaps your conversation will spark something which I wish to hear as well. No need to repeat yourself twice.
Thomas pauses and glances back at his fellows.
I agree in this case, Thomas. Enough with the posturing. Let's get on with it.
He shrugs a bit.
What is Elena doing during this time?
She has her hands folded in her lap, and she is mainly observing.
And Robert?
Robert was mainly observing how Thomas's request would play out, but he's eager to get on with the question asking.
You were present the night of the blaze, yes?
Yes, my lord.
Where precisely in the manor were you prior to the blaze beginning?
I was standing at the southeastern end of the hall outside my master's chamber as he and his associates gathered. There was nothing out of the ordinary. I and the other bodyguards were to stand outside the meeting and patrol the halls at the top floor of the manor. I heard some commotion outside and went to the window to look out. I saw a man I recognized, a man by the name of Robert Dufour. He was engaged in melee with several other of my Lord Gaetan's retinue, cutting them down. I turned to yell down the hall and saw the other bodyguards were being assailed, pulled back and their throats being slit, just as I myself felt a pulling and pressure near my neck, followed by the hot warmth of my blood pooling down my neck, and a series of pressure from behind. Stabs, I wager. I think I heard raised voices after that, but then everything faded away. I next awoke in the care of Lord Kincaid of Bristol. They tell me it was a day later. That is all I recall.
Approximately how many assailants would you say struck that night? Best guess is fine.
He shakes his head. I saw 2 down the hall, and the one which assailed me, and Robert Dufour.
Do you recall, if you could hear it, what Master Dufour was saying? You said he was shouting.
He shakes his head. I thought I heard shouting down the hall. I could not hear anything outside down below in the courtyard. Most likely it raised voices from the staff.
The individuals engaged in melee with Mr. Dufour, you're certain they were part of Lord de Corvo's complement?
He nods. I knew every man.
And can you be certain he was not attacking in self-defense?
It would be a strange quality in a man indeed to come to another's estate in the middle of the night and begin a melee with his retinue, would it not?
It would, but then if he brought warning.
Robert Dufour had no business at the estate. I cannot see it as anything except an attack.
And these men of this complement, were fiercely loyal, yes?
He nods.
And if a man who had no business at the estate were to approach insistently, would they respond in force?
They were not brigands, the retinue of Gaetan de Corvo. They were smart soldiers, smart men. They would not cut down a visitor simply for arriving at a poor time. No, Robert Dufour meant them violence.
You say the Gauntlet was gathered in a hall, in a room, away. Though we have it that they were in a foyer at one point, prior to the blaze beginning.
He shakes his head. That cannot be. They were in their meeting, an annual meeting. They were in that room behind me, with the hallway surrounding it, and the hallway filled with guards. Perhaps they were in the foyer earlier in the evening, but...
No. We have it that they were outside of the meeting. Did you happen to hear any glass break inside the meeting room prior to losing consciousness?
Perhaps. I was losing blood quickly. I cannot say for certain what I heard with any reliability.
Then perhaps you cannot say what you saw with much reliability either.
I saw what I saw before I was assailed. Take that for what you will. And he shrugs.
I want to use perception investigation, but I don't feel like it's appropriate.
You can try. What are you trying to figure out?
Whether or not he's been coached. Alternate to that, whether or not these memories that he's repeating are planted using Dominate, but that might be a little bit overt.
You would need to make use of your own gifts or something else to detect that. But you could do... I'll give you a perception... I would do perception empathy. If you want to do perception investigation, you can. But I'm going to put at a higher difficulty, because it's really more in the realm of perception empathy.
We'll do perception empathy.
Okay, difficulty 6.
Can I do so as well?
Absolutely. Anyone can. Wait for the rolls to come in.
Difficulty 8 or 7?
Standard.
What is the role exactly?
Perception, empathy.
Perception, empathy.
Yeah. To basically gauge Cornelius during this interrogation. Okay. Robert, you're not able to tell. He's kind of stony-faced, and it's difficult to get a read on him. Elenid and Cormac, you're able to tell that he's speaking from memory. He's not fabricating any of this, so far as he is aware. And Thomas, you're aware that he's not fabricating anything, he's speaking from memory, and you detect a hint of anxiety despite that. You're not sure from where, though, or why.
It's all right, Cornelius. I know sometimes it can be hard to remember.
Yes. I only wish I could provide more information.
No, it's not that. It's definitely difficult to remember the events as they happened. It can be even more difficult to remember whom it is you serve most directly.
Thomas, careful.
Yeah, that draws narrowed eyes from Jean-Marc. Would you care to elaborate?
Whose care did you say you awakened in?
Lord Kincaid of Bristol.
And did he feed you his blood to sustain you?
No. He shakes his
No.
head vehemently.
Such grievous wounds. You had been well taken care of then.
I owe it to my late master, or the strength which runs in my veins.
A slit throat, multiple stabs to the back of your skull, and surviving a blaze which consumed an entire mansion. You owe quite a bit more. There are Cainites who would have succumbed. 4 come to mind immediately. Tell me again how it was you survived the blaze and the stabbing and the slit throats.
He narrows his eyes at you. It was my choice. I would have been the one to die there instead of Lord Gaetan. And he kind of leans forward a moment.
What choice was that, sir?
The choice of fate, as it would so happen.
I wonder if this was fate, or perhaps your life is part of a ploy to leave one alive, feed them false information, perhaps.
I ask again, what choice did you make, Cornelius?
He looks to Jean-Marc for a moment, looking more angry now, and then looking back to you. I chose loyalty.
To whom?
To Gaetan de Corvo.
Well, obviously, you maintain that loyalty even in your master's demise.
Yes.
But I ask again, how did you survive such grievous wounds where 4 fine and upstanding members of our community were unable to extricate themselves from the blaze? You, an injured ghoul, survived.
I do not know. I should be dead, and yet I am not. I can only owe it to the great resolve and physical strength which my master blessed me with for decades. I was near death for some time, but I never accepted the blood of another.
Even now.
Even now.
Then it is a good thing we found you when we did. You'll be dust soon. For surely you would have expended a great deal of your master's gifts in order to recover from your wounds.
Perhaps better to die than continue on with this. I do not hope to find a lord to serve as honorable as Lord Gaetan was.
Now, you've given a fine performance, Cornelius. What aren't you telling us?
He grits his teeth, looking towards you. I think that is enough questioning for tonight, Jean-Marc says, rising from his seat. There is no need to be rude in my court. Cornelius has provided the answers he may, and I have endured your disrespect of my guest long enough, I think, my lord. We have both lost a dear friend and companion. There is nothing more to gain here except anger and resentment.
With all due respect, Your Grace, Someone has tampered with him.
Cornelius looks between the two of you. And Jean-Marc gives him a look as well. If he has been corrupted in some way,
It's quite coached, very mundane. It is not a supernatural gift, which is why it most likely went undetected. Most of what he says is indeed from memory. But whether it is memory of the event itself, there's an anxiety there. He's worried about something slipping up, misremembering the lines he's practiced. I couldn't be sure that it wasn't you. Again, no offense. But given your vehemence that he be trusted, no, you're quite sincere in your resolve. You're looking out for the trusted servant of a dear friend lost. However,
Jean-Marc kind of shifts his weight, looking towards you.
someone else is not.
I'll take a perception alertness roll from everyone. Difficulty 8. Robert and Thomas, you notice out of the corner of your eye, in the far corner of the room, the ghoul, this right-hand man to Jean-Marc, has shifted his weight and he's tensing, and his hand is just barely nudging the hilt of his blade, as though he's prepared to pounce at a moment's notice. I think perhaps we should call this interrogation at a close. I will take your consideration under advisement and bring Cornelius to the court of Ragnar, perhaps, where she may again test Cornelius's memory, and we will not further push Cornelius anymore tonight. And he puts a hand on Cornelius's shoulder, kind of standing and looking at you.
As you say, Your Grace.
But of course, grandsire. Arrest is well called for. We have been traveling long as well.
Indeed, I insist you stay at the tower. Arrangements can be made for each of you.
Are you sure it wouldn't be an imposition? We can seek out our own accommodations if it's a bother.
I insist. He says, looking to you.
Well, I must admit I would like to visit my estate, but since it's been so long, one night couldn't hurt.
Very good. Reynal will show you to your rooms. And Reynal steps over to the side of the table behind the group of you.
Thomas will stand first in that case.
And Cormac will rise next.
Elened will follow suit.
And so will Robert.
All right. And Reynal leads you out of the top level of this tower and back down this spiral stone staircase. As Jean-Marc watches you go, his hand still firmly on the shoulder of Cornelius. Alright. And the group of you are led to a series of rooms. They're well appointed. Of course, there's no windows. You each have very nice beds set out and armoires for your belongings. They're very spacious accommodations, very princely. And they're all fairly close to each other. So you can each see down the hall there are doors that lead into each of these apartments, as they were. And without much ceremony, once you are led there, you see that many of your belongings are brought there by other men-at-arms and other staff. And Reynal departs with some of them. So you have this long stone hallway and 4 of these rooms that are all kind of very close to each other. And you rejoin outside of them after being brought down here. You are still in the castle, although at a much lower level. And so as the group of you come back out of the rooms you've been given, I will give this scene to you as the last of these men depart.
Robert will simply look around and see if there's anything to write on.
I understand the necessity, but it's potentially angering those of high rank a bit of a game now.
Thomas is rather stoically propped against a wall. It's definitely not how I wanted it to go.
And before I forget, I should note, Hugh was very quiet during that time. He never got out of his seat. He was just watching very seriously this exchange, and he waited behind with Jean-Marc as well.
That may be so, but it is a reoccurring theme. One, but a theme nonetheless.
So it is. I do not think drawing the ire of those domains we enter is the most intelligent thing we could be doing.
The questions needed asked. I would have rather done it in private, but Jean-Marc insisted on being present.
Fair enough, but there is a time and a place.
True enough, but the time and place was not going to be allowed. My other option was to not ask questions at all, which would have been even more suspicious.
I'm thankful at least you did not mention our meeting with Tifor. I think the
No.
time for that must wait.
I was going to inspect this room. Is there anything about the design that would make it easy to listen in on them?
You perception investigation, difficulty 7.
This investigation is all for show. Why else would they hand it to us and then hamstring us at every turn?
I had considered that as well.
And Robert, you size up the hallway and the rooms that you've been appointed, and you don't really detect anything particularly susceptible to eavesdropping, any more than any other well-appointed castle room would be.
If what you put forth is true, then perhaps we should figure out how to not be the next on the list.
Thomas gives a look at Cormac and arches a brow quietly.
Is there something you'd expect me to say?
No. Suffice to say, I had given thought to that. I have the inklings of a plan.
Are you going to leave us in suspense?
It's half-formed. Still more questions than answers to it. Though you and I have already spoken of the beginnings of it. The other night in the stables.
I do recall. Do you think there's a connection?
I think perhaps we're feeling very much the same way that the previous Gauntlet felt towards their end.
All the more reason then why we should keep it to ourselves.
Quite so.
In fact, it's probably not safe to even speak of it here. Certainly they have ways to listen to our conversations.
A good set of ears at the end of an echoey hallway do quite a wonder.
It is best in this case to err on the side of caution.
The question is now, how do we proceed? Seeing that that ghoul has now become a dead end.
We can write off his entire report.
I already have done.
Good.
There's something not right about it.
It's suspect. He wasn't subjugated. So how did they miss it? Unless it was intentional.
Perhaps more could be discovered from Ragna.
If the seven princes of the Covenant want something to be so, then it is so.
I must say, for tonight at least, we're at an impasse. Perhaps we should sleep on it.
How much time is left?
Of the night?
Mm-hmm.
You're not entirely sure, you think maybe half?
It's still quite early. Though this is not my city.
Well, everyone should decide what they'll do. For now, speak with my grandsire.
And I wish to have a chat with my sire.
I think it prudent that I remain behind.
All right. So Cormac and Robert are heading off. What's Elena doing?
Elena does much of all to do here. Outside of waiting for her ghoul or getting a general layout of the town.
All
And
right.
if my math is correct, her ghoul is still a good days off.
A good how many?
3 days.
That sounds right. I was going to say about 5, but 3 sounds fine as well. Something between then.
Alright.
Travel is not a science at this age. So you're going to remain behind?
Sure. If only to get a general layout of the town.
Okay, you're going out to peruse the town?
I think Thomas
Yes.
will probably join her then.
Okay. Then as two of you depart together and Cormac and Robert leave to find their respective blood family, we'll follow Cormac first. As you make your way through these halls, it's a little confusing. This castle is large. It's something of a maze at first. But as you're passing through, you do happen upon some staff, and asking around, you are directed to where Hugo often stays, and you're directed to the chapel of the castle, which is near the bottom level. And a few minutes later, you're walking through, you find the chapel, and you do find your sire, who seems to be sitting in quiet contemplation off to one of the pews on the side. There is one other person at this late hour who is kind of praying in front of the altar. It looks like they're quite distressed by something. And Hugo is kind of off to the side.
Do I know this other person?
No, it's just he's a staff or a man-at-arms off duty, you're not sure. Someone at late hour of the night who's not doing well.
He will leave them to their own sordid affairs then. This man or woman. He will kneel and genuflect next to the pew where Hugo is sitting, and then take a quiet seat next to him.
He stares
Waiting
straight
to be-
ahead. Go ahead.
Waiting to be acknowledged is all I was going to say.
He stares straight ahead, kind of watching this man. I'm sorry, were you going to say something? I keep interrupting you.
No, it's fine. Nothing important.
His father was a Percy. He is fighting for his life after a skirmish with the Nevilles. He is unlikely to survive his wounds, so the boy prays. he says very quietly, looking ahead. This country has far too much violence in it, for my taste, both in our world and theirs.
On that, at least we can agree. Too many at odds with one another. Seems to me it's become quite the epidemic.
He nods, still looking ahead. It seems your companion adds to that conflict. It was very tense in that room.
He means well. He's just very direct.
You should be careful. He may be a Lord of the Gauntlet, but Jean-Marc is not forgiving. For his many admirable qualities, wrath, I'm afraid, is not one of them.
I do believe he realized his folly soon enough. And while I won't say that he's become penitent, he knows better than to push the issue any further.
Do you? And he finally turns to look at you.
Cormac can't help but smile at that. You know me too well. You know damn well, given half the chance, I'm gonna push it.
I can't say I would have chosen you if you weren't that kind of man.
I know you can't say anything of your own private thoughts on the matter, being as loyal as you are to the prince, but surely you must agree that something strange is going on here.
He nods ever so slightly and ever so quietly.
I'm not going to end up like those other four. And if I can help it, none of us will. But that is the reason I came to speak to you.
And he seems to wait.
I know that you can maintain confidence in like no other, Hugo. So I don't feel afraid to tell you what I'm about to tell you. I think Defoe is innocent.
His head slowly turns to you.
He was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
And I think you're right.
Cormac nods. That does bring us to the question of conflict, however. Are you aware that below your very noses there is a cadre of vampires who seeks to undo the Covenant?
do you speak?
Rebels, Hugo. Organized ones. Not like the beasts that I drove off. Connected, maybe, but not the same.
He seems to have an uncomfortable look as he looks ahead. For as long as I have had thought of what I would like to do with my eternity, I have wished for a peaceful and stable England. And it seems the older I get, and the more I achieve, the further that dream seems to become.
You want to know the worst part about it? The part that makes my soul ache.
He turns to
I don't think they're wrong.
Perhaps they are not. If there is a rebel group, regardless of what they fight for, there have been many rebellions in England's history, some of them just, and some of them folly. But they all involve bloodshed, carnage. I do not need to know what the goals of this rebellion need be, but perhaps you should ask yourself if their goals are worth the bloodshed you expect to see from their actions. Is it worth it?
That's the part about it I can't reconcile. Is it worth it? And have they made powerful enemies already?
I chose you, in part because I saw in you the mind which I believe could entertain an idea without accepting it, to entertain discourse without becoming caught in the same passion which our kind is so known for. And at the same time, because you had the passion to act on what you believe in. It is because of these things that I can discuss these ideas with you without myself becoming enraged at the idea of a band of rebels rampaging my country, and you thinking them right. You will have to consider strongly if the damage they wreak, even if they should succeed, is a cost that you will bear and find acceptable.
This is just the wisdom I was expecting. You have helped to ease my troubled mind.
He smiles faintly, but it's brief. Would that you could do for the same for me, my child.
Cormac's brows furrow at that. What do you mean? Does something trouble you, sire?
I begin to fear what my liege would do to ensure his own proliferation and success and survival. What cost will he accept?
I must admit I was somewhat hoping you thought that way.
I
You
am
wouldn't be-
bound. Go ahead.
Go ahead, you're good.
I am bound by oath, not through blood, but through my word, to serve him. And yet, as I have said, I worry what this will do to England if my greatest fears should be manifest. He has spent much time with Cornelius since he was taken from the custody of Kincaid. Much time, he said, looking to you very gravely.
Cormac nods. He gets it. He won't say aloud that he gets it, but he does.
There may be answers in the boy, though I suspect you will never hear them while my liege is present.
Precisely what Master Chamberlain thought. And I didn't think him wrong for thinking it.
No, but the way in which he goes about forcing this is a very dangerous way to create an enemy with no tangible results.
I saw our liege's agitation, which is why I asked him to get on with it. But I too would like a private word. Not that that can be arranged.
His face goes grim as though to acknowledge that.
We simply have to... Go ahead.
He keeps Cornelius at his side wherever he goes. Cornelius is not allowed to leave so far as I am able to detect.
We simply have to find another way.
Whatever way you choose it carefully, as you may only receive the one choice. There may not be a going back.
And I have much to think upon and discuss with my fellows.
He nods quietly.
It was wonderful seeing you again. You know how I appreciate your kind words and your advice.
Indeed, it was good to see you as well, and in the company of fierce intellect, if not as controlled as I would prefer.
All three of them have many admirable traits. I couldn't ask for a better company.
Good. Tread carefully, my child. He looks to you, sorrowfully.
as careful as I can, anyway. You know how I can be. And he smiles.
Hugo will smile in return.
He'll then rise, seeing the conversation at an end, and leave Hugo to his thoughts.
Alright. You leave from this side pew in the back as Hugo continues to sit there, and you return to the myriad halls of this castle. I know there are more conversations we want to get to, but I think we are going to close it here and end the session. We will pick it up next week. Good game all around. Very good game. I thought.
Yep.
Anybody still have clean pants?
Gross. I enjoyed the roleplay.
Hey, your own
especially.
bladder control issues are us.
Well, I figured more people than just me was shitting themselves during that fucking interrogation. So.
It was good.
So it's bowel control.
The Gauntlet gets in a fight with one of the princes of the Covenant.
No, it's not the Gauntlet. It's singular person of the Gauntlet.
Yeah, I was going to
That's
say, I
true.
was way the fuck
That's
out of limb.
everyone else in there was completely silent. It was him who was the target.
Here I thought it was one for all and all for one.
No, apparently not. I am D'Artagnan.
Well, that was fun. Let's do some entertaining roleplay. We'll start with Thomas.
I'm going to give it to Cormac. Especially there at the end. I really enjoyed the interaction with the reluctant admissions.
Yeah, I enjoyed that a lot too.
Half admissions, as it were.
Cool. Alright, one to Cormac. And what about you, Cormac?
Oh, gosh. Some cool stuff happened tonight. Yeah, I have to give it to Thomas, just for pissing off the prince. It was too good.
Very tense. How about you, Elened?
Let's see. It's a toss-up between Cormac and Thomas, but it's gonna go Cormac.
Pretty cool. And Robert.
I like Cormac tonight, especially how quick he was to defend the destruction of that corrupt tome that Robert found.
Cool. Alright, so that's 1 to Thomas and 3 to Cormac. So that is an extra experience point through roleplay. And it's going to be 2 all around as a base. Very good game. Very much enjoyed the roleplay tonight. Very much looking forward to next week.
When we get the fuck out of Lincoln. I mean, what?
No, when Robert goes to talk to his grandsire, and we can see what happens.
That too.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Alright, good game. Have a good night, guys. Talk to you guys later.
Good night.
Yep.